On this episode of the Synergee Podcast, we are joined by Dr. Lindsay Berkson, a trailblazer in functional and integrative medicine with decades of experience tackling the most complex hormonal and gastrointestinal cases. Known for her ability to connect cutting-edge research with real-world solutions, Dr. Berkson has been transforming lives since the 1970s. Her journey as a clinician, researcher, and patient has fueled her passion for helping others uncover the root causes of illness and reclaim their health. Tune in as Dr. Berkson shares her expertise and insights to empower your wellness journey.
We so appreciate you being here. We've connected with you at several of the A4M meetings at the Biotics booth, and we're so inspired by your books and just your presence. And we were just beside ourselves when you agreed to come on the podcast. So we're glad you're here.
Well, thank you. That's very lovely for you to say. I really appreciate that. Sorry I was late. I'm usually painfully I'm always early, but anyway, there we go.
So Dr. Berkson, can you share your story with us? Like, what got you interested in this whole world of hormones and hormone balance?
Well, I did a rotation in integrative medicine when I was still a senior in school with Dr. Jonathan Wright, who was already at that point just starting to write the very first bioidentical hormone scripts for patients. And he was saying how important hormones were. They were foundational. I think I was in like 1977, 1976.
Wow.
So I've been running hormone tests since the mid to late 1970s on patients. Yeah. And then I was really ill myself. Most people get into better eating habits and having a different viewpoint on how they live once they get ill. Before people get ill, they often live a typical lifestyle and they don't think very much about their health, because health is not having to think about your health, but you actually often have to do a lot of happy strategies to achieve that. But I heard a lecture by Scott Nearing at a Theosophical Society meeting in 1971. And Scott said, "You are what you eat. Your body's a temple. The less chemicals you put into that temple, the more you can go after your dreams and have a healthier lifestyle. And it makes sense to try and reduce exposure to chemicals in your food." And I was in my later teens at that time, and it made sense to me. So when I went off to school, I always had gardens after that, raised my own goats, made my own goat milk. I was a yoga teacher, lived in India, studied Ayurvedic medicine, meditated, forgiveness, detoxes, and then I started getting cancer. So I was doing all of these things. That's why I know that you can't just do those things and get rid of cancer. So I'm not a big fan of only detoxing and giving up gluten and getting rid of cancer. But I'd been doing so much right, but getting the wrong outcomes, and nobody knew why. So I got breast cancer, then I had kidney cancer, then I lost my adrenal glands, then I just started being ill constantly. And no one knew what to do with me, but I looked like the picture of health because I'd been doing yoga and going to a gym and eating organic and detoxing, but I was ill.
Dr. Berkson, what was the age of your first cancer?
In my early 40s.
Wow. Okay.
But I was really battled fatigue and battled blindness, battled a wide variety of things. And it wasn't until I saw an article in 1993, I read a newspaper article that endocrine disrupting compounds were starting to be in our air, food, and water, and they harmed our hormones. And I already had a great appreciation of hormones. And then I read that book by Sheldon Pierce, which is called The De-Evolution of Man. And he gave a list of the things that really reduced health of humanity. And one of the things was endocrine disruptors. And I thought, what's an endocrine disruptor? I know the endocrine system's important, but in the 1990s, other than that one little newspaper article in that book by Dr. Sheldon Pierce, you never heard anything about endocrine disruptors at all. So I decided that I was going to write a book on endocrine disruptors, but I didn't put two and two together with my health issues and endocrine disruptors. I just knew it didn't make sense that I was doing a lot of hard-earned, disciplined, good habits, but getting very unhealthy outcomes. But I read this article and I thought, I've always loved to write. I already had several books out by then. And I thought, I think I'm going to write one of the very first books on endocrine disruptors. So it took me about 6 years because I had to travel to all the scientific meetings that different scientists held because there were no papers on it. There were no books on it. There was nothing on it. Nobody knew anything about endocrine disruptors. And I started sending out book proposals to different publishers, and everybody said, this isn't worthy of a book. Nobody cares about endocrine disruptors. Until I finally bumped into McGraw-Hill and Judith, trying to remember her last name. Judith was my editor there, and she thought that this was worthy of a book. So I spent 6 years on writing Hormone Deception, and it came out within a 3-month period where the first books on endocrine disruption came out. There was My Stolen Future, Hormonal Chaos, and my book, Hormone Deception. And we all came out in a 3-month period. And then that started introducing the public to the concept of endocrine disruption. But while I was writing that book, I got breast cancer, and then I had a tumor in my kidney. And I had a very rare form of breast cancer and a very rare form of the tumor in my kidney. And as I was writing Hormone Deception, it turned out that a lot of the laboratory studies taking a look at how do we understand endocrine disruptors? Is there a model compound we can research that will teach us about it? The model compound they discovered that was the worst endocrine disruptor that was ever invented. And they started doing research with this. When they researched this compound in hamsters, they all got the tumors that I got. And I bumped into that by writing that book. And I knew that there was a think tank. I'm calling it a think tank, but it was really an environmental estrogen scientific group called the Center for Bioenvironmental Research. And they were the scientists who discovered endocrine disruptors. They were the ones who put it on the map. And they also worked with the scientists who discovered the first hormone receptors. So John McLaughlin started the CBR, the Center for Bioenvironmental Research. And it was the first think tank of endocrine disruptors. And he was the world's expert on estrogen. And when I was wanting to publish my book, Hormone Deception, I sent it to John asking him because I met him at all these conferences because they were the only scientists talking about endocrine disruption. I said, would you kindly write me a foreword? And when he read the book, he said, I want you to come work with us and I want to give you a free PhD, but that was right when I was getting another cancer. So I had a lot on my plate, but then I was able to speak to the research scientists who published the studies. Her name was Retha Newbold, that found the same exact tumors in the animals exposed to diethylstilbestrol, the model compound in the womb. They would have the same tumors. I went and met with her, and I soon started kind of getting the feel that all my problems didn't have anything to do with the way I was living now. That it all went back to my exposure in the womb and what my mother was exposed to. So the model compound that these scientists first used to figure out endocrine disruption was the most powerful synthetic estrogen ever invented, called diethylstilbestrol. It was 15 times more powerful than 17-beta estradiol, which is our own natural made or endogenous estrogen. And Retha said to me, you ought to right away for your birth records and see if you can see that you were exposed to this in the womb. So I was born at Michael Reese Hospital in Chicago, and I was able to get my microfiche birth records right while I was going to Tulane, right after Hormone Deception had just come out, so I couldn't put any of this in the first edition of the book. And there it was, right there in print. My mother had been given injections of diethylstilbestrol twice in her first trimester. They used to give it if a woman spotted. They thought it would make a threatened miscarriage be safer to go to full term. And they also put DES is the acronym for diethylstilbestrol because it's kind of a big name. They also put it into 365 prenatal vitamins. So most of the women of that era that took prenatal vitamins got DES, and my mother had a record of the name of the prenatal vitamins she took. They used to put all this in the birth records, and it contained DES. And I also lived in Chicago where all the feedlots were filled with DES because it marbles the muscle and cattle, and it makes beef taste a lot better. And in fact, we're the only country that's still illegally dump some DES into meat because everyone here loves steak. I live in Texas. Texans love steak. And a lot of people use it illegally because it was banned. Ultimately, DES was banned in 1971 as the most cancer-causing substance ever to be invented, but not until it had been given to 38 million pregnant women. From 1938 till it was banned in 1971. And I ended up getting 2 injections, and the first trimester is always the most fragile. And then my mother took the prenatal vitamins, and in the animals exposed to even just 1 dose in utero, they were getting the same tumors that I was getting. Well, then that kind of started me on my life path of dealing with the epigenetics, that what goes on in the womb, how it affects the rest of your life, and the influence on your genes of prenatal exposure, and also the importance of hormones, because what these chemicals do is make your hormones through a variety of potential mechanisms, and not in everybody, but in some vulnerable populations, like the first trimester fetuses are extremely vulnerable populations. They can futz with the way your life expresses itself over your next 70 years or so. So DES daughters, for example, always have to get pap smears all the way up till they die, because you can get this clear cell vaginal adenocarcinoma, which started showing up in 14, 15, 16-year-old girls. And the way all this got figured out was there was a clump of girls, especially in Massachusetts and Chicago, that were 12, 13, 14, 15, and got this rare cervical cancer that no one else had hardly ever had. And there was a group of young girls. So John McLaughlin, who ran the CBR, was in an elevator with a bunch of the women who had just gone to talk to people in the hospital to say, what's going on with our daughters? And nobody knew what. And one of the moms in the elevator said out loud, do you think it could have anything to do with what we took when we were pregnant? And they started asking each other, and they'd all taken the prenatal vitamins, and some of them had gotten those injections. And that's how the story, as most stories do, they come from patients noticing things, and finally some scientists or physicians listening to what the patients notice.
So Dr. Berkson, when did you go to med school? Because it sounds like a lot of that history really drove maybe your passion into digging in. No.
And I didn't. So I got my master's in nutrition in 73. And then I went to chiropractic and naturopathic school in 1976. And then I became a scientist at the CBR in the Center for Bioenvironmental Research. I don't have all my numbers together, but that was a number of a decade and a half after that or so. So I didn't think of this at all when I was in school, but the minute that when I was young and I heard that talk from Scott, and he said that health begins with the land, it begins with your food, that made so much sense to me. All I wanted to do was be a natural doctor. And I wanted to do things that didn't lean on pharmacologic interventions and didn't have you diagnose something and then have an algorithm to look and see what pharmaceutical you use. I wanted to look at the harmony of the whole, like you look at the soil and the air and our water as part of the template and tapestry of human health and the human body. That made sense to me. That one lecture, I ended up living with him and his wife. They wrote the foreword for my first book, which came out in 1971. called The Foot Book. And I ended up living with them and building log houses, felling the trees, and learning about nutrition. They had a huge library, reading everything I can get my hands on. And then I decided I wanted to be a natural doctor, but I didn't know I was going to be battling all of these health issues, which then Jonathan first told me the importance of hormones. And then I realized hormones could be disrupted, and my own hormones were disrupted. And now it's ended up being so incredible, my mission in life. I just ended up teaching my very first 16 hours of CME for medical doctors and nurse practitioners with David Brownstein called Everything Hormones. And this year, I'll hopefully be putting on one with the famous gastroenterologist, Dr. Sam Rabar, called Everything Gut. And then Jen Simmons, who just came out with her best-selling book, A Smart Woman's Guide to Breast Cancer, we're going to be doing one called Everything Breast Cancers.
Are they going to be offered at traditional med schools, or are these going to be offered? So tell me where this is going to be.
So Everything Hormones is offered right now online. If you go to my website, drlindsayberkson.com, and just right at the top menu bar, it has Everything Hormones. And you could read the entire schedule and what we teach and the bonus materials and everything. And we've now reached almost 300 doctors from 7 countries, a lot of them OBGYN and urologists, and a lot of nurse practitioners and a few naturopaths and a few chiropractors. And I think we had a health coach or two. And the ones that we're going to put on now, I think it's going to be a smattering of online CMEs, continuing medical education. I don't know who your audience is for this talk, and also some in person. So Dr. Brownstein and I might in Chicago and in Florida put on 2 conferences where one day we do a summary of hormones and the second day will be Old Docs Share Pearls. And we'll talk about all the interesting pearls that we've learned through. I've been in practice one way or another now, 53 years. I just turned 76 a week ago.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you so much, or 2 weeks ago. And you learn a lot of things along the way, especially if you're not feeling you must draw color within the lines. Yes. You know, if you can think outside of the lines. So these things will be available online or in person. And if you go to my website, we always keep a running advertisement of what we're doing.
I just feel like your life passion and mission is just so incredible. And I want to plant another seed because I have a huge passion for preconception medicine. You know, I spent a lot of my career in early days, OBGYN practice, and then I started a functional practice and really helping women balance hormones and really understanding hormone disruption. And now I'm like, I really feel like this strong push and urge to develop something for preconception because I just feel like that's such an area of impact. Think about the 3 generations that can be impacted by one birth, right? One female, that we have them understand all the hormone disruptors and really embrace a lifestyle that promotes hormone balance, what we're doing for future generations. So in your course development, I would highly recommend that there's some attention paid to this preconception medicine idea because I just think it's one of the best ways we can make an impact.
Well, maybe you and I can do something together because I put together something called Green Pregnancy. And I put it together as a graphic for doctors to be able to talk to their patients and inspire them that how you live and detox before you get pregnant. There's no guarantees 100% for anything, but it gives you most likely, ups your percentage incredibly for having healthier children and healthier families that don't have such angst of having a child that's seriously ill. And I've been caring about this a lot, but I have not been able to get OBGYNs or interested in this at all because it's not procedure based. And I actually think that detox should move mainstream and that detox could be a procedure that you could work with your patients on. And detox is so important because we all know that infertility is on the rise. The tireless work of Shanna Swan. I worked with her a lot at Tulane, and she's in her late 90s and still running around the planet as a scientist, trying to let people know that our sperm is not in 2025, our sperm is not what it was in 1985. And I think the concept of preconception health is so important, but people don't seem to be drawn to it because they can't wrap their brain around a way to put it into practice without making money, without a lot of education. So if, you ever want to brainstorm on that, because I think it's the most important way to go. Yeah. And I was hoping to get in touch with Kennedy if I could, because David, who I just put on that conference with, he's Kennedy's physician. Mm-hmm. And I think that Kennedy should hear about this. It's so important because we could turn the Titanic away from the icebergs a bit if you look at ADHD and many of the other issues. And I think it's brilliant, but people kind of hear it and they can't figure out a way to go from hearing it to implementing it,
yes.
And making money off of it, for all their hard work. So if we could brainstorm on that sometime, that would be wonderful, because it's incredibly important. But you can right now go to my website if you're interested and buy the slides I had to put together with a graphic artist to just introduce you to that concept if you're anybody, but often if you're a doc, if you want to train your patients in it kind of goes through that concept in those slides.
I love that. I did take some time to look at your website, and I thought it was amazing the way that you have it so clearly outlined. The offerings that you have in the way of education, they're just beautiful. And I think such a tremendous resource. The amount of work that you've put into what's there is incredible. So we certainly appreciate that. And we'll definitely promote that.
Thank you for saying that. You're making me feel so much better. It's so nice to be seen. And if you're a writer and you're an educator or you're working on slides, like I'm doing a 1-day course on hormones for doctors the last Saturday in February. And, you work on those slides for 40, 50 hours, but it's a solo thing and you don't really get much feedback except from the doctors right at the time. But your feedback is really sincerely touching my heart. I appreciate it.
Good.
Well, there's such a gap between education and application. So I want to go back to that statement, right? And, that's a lot of what Kelly and I's work is helping people first understand, because they have to understand to take action, but giving them some nuggets of things they can do, because it can be very, very overwhelming. When you think about endocrine disruptors, name the most common endocrine disruptors.
Bisphenol A.
Right. And we just got an email today, right? Where are they at? In everything, right? Plastics, microplastics, everywhere. And it can be very overwhelming. So what are some nuggets? What are some nuggets of things that could be done that are practical and easy? What do you tell your patients?
Well, first of all, I did write that book, Hormone Deception. And the last third of this book is all about learning how to reduce. Oh, thank you. Learning how to reduce exposure, because we're all appreciating now that the metabolic crisis, maybe even the cancer crisis, the obesity crisis, because endocrine disruptors make your fat stem cells act very nasty. And the mesenchymal cells that make fat cells also make bone cells. So we have two trajectories of epidemics. We have an obesity epidemic and an osteoporosis epidemic, a lot of it coming from endocrine disruptors. And but people are now understanding that a lot of global health issues, not all, of course, but a lot are from endocrine disruption exposure, starting even before the egg and the sperm meet and mingle. And all the way through life, we can still be sensitive to them. And as you get older, you're even more sensitive. You go back to kind of when you're an older person, you start having a similar fragility to them that you did in your first trimester in the womb. So the bookends of life, you're more sensitive to them, but nobody knows what to do about it. So the first thing you got to do is figure out in your own little world how to reduce exposure without driving yourself crazy, because they're ubiquitous. But the EPA did an elegant set of studies called the TEAM studies. It took them 10 years, and they put monitors on people. It was a representative sample, a little under 4,000 people, and they put monitors that could pick up endocrine disruptors and pollution and see where do we get most of our pollution. And from these 10 years of intricate EPA studies called the TEAM study, TEAM, they discovered that the bad news is most of it, the exposure is in our home. But the good news is most of the exposure is in our home. So if most of your exposure comes from the home, you have a lot that you can do about it, because your home, whether it's an apartment or a house or a room in a dormitory, this is still your little area that you have some control over. So taking a few steps. So the biggest steps that you could do are wiping your, Cornell did intricate studies about how to get it off the bottom of your shoes, because you carry in heavy metals, PCBs, forever chemicals on the bottom of your shoes. So they found if you have a mat outside and wipe your feet 4 times and come in and wipe your feet another 4 times in an inner mat and then take your shoes off, then you have better shoes and better climate in your home. Because when they did these studies, people who didn't take their shoes off, endocrine disrupting compounds were found within a few minutes on the master pillowcases up in the master bedroom.
Wow. So I have an air filter. I have an AeroAsis air filter in my closet. I have them in many rooms, but my closet is one of the rooms I have it in. And it is the dirtiest one. It is the one that I have to change most frequently. It's the one I have to clean externally more frequently. And I do have my shoes in my closet. And so my husband and I have talked about, should we kind of create a mud room of sorts where we have all the shoes kind of in the laundry room instead of bringing them into the closet. So I'm glad you're talking about cleaning your feet before you come in, cleaning them after, and then off with the shoes.
And giving permission to our ladies who, we are kind of the master organizers of our home to put a sign on our door that says leave shoes at the door, right? Because sometimes I do think there's almost like a negative, like, oh my God, you're one of those, you're one of those. But yes, I am one of those. Proudly speaking, I'm one of those. Leave your shoes either outside or...
I have a little sign saying wipe your shoes 4 times, come in and leave them right at the door.
Yes.
I have a little sign because it's important, because I don't want to get another, I don't want to get ill again. And these are steps to stay well.
Right.
Yeah.
The other biggest thing is your shower water. I mean, if you could have your whole house filtered, when I was writing Hormone Deception, I actually helped create one of the very first whole water systems, even for reverse osmosis, because I realized, you aerosolize water from your washing machine, your dishwashing machine. Water, when you run water in your sink, it aerosolizes, and water treatment plants don't remove endocrine disruptors. They don't remove metabolites of birth control pills. They don't remove metabolites of hormone therapies. And there's also a lot of organic matter in there that makes trihalomethanes, which are very cancer forming. So you stand under a shower for 5 minutes of hot water and your pores open up. And if the water is dirty with things that can potentially harm you, but it's cleaner than most other worlds. So yes, we do have somewhat good water, but they don't get the things out that we now know are a epidemic tragedy booster. So just getting a Berkey type water shower filter. It used to be $49 last year, and now it's $129 this year. It went up that much in price, and you got to change them every 6 months, but it's worth it, because when you stand under the shower and your pores open up, you get in all these cancer-causing endocrine disruptors. Dumbing down can lower your IQ points, all the things that endocrine disruptors can do, and all that's minimized by putting a little shower filter on your shower where the water comes out. That's one of the biggest places of reducing exposure is in the shower.
And now the whole house water filtration systems are really cost effective. To your point, just changing one on your shower is $150 for every few months. When the whole house filter that we have, we change it once a year, it's $350.
Well, so which one do you use?
It's distributed by WM Filters. It looks like an oxygen tank. It's just a reverse osmosis charcoal filter, but you change it once a year, so easy to maintain. There's no monitor that tells you when to change it, so we do have to set our calendar to change it yearly. And And we've used that for the last 5 to 6 years, and it has been tremendous. We were doing all of the ones on the shower heads and driving ourselves crazy, changing those out.
I know it is. It does drive you. So where do you put that?
So you put it outside at your intake. So where your water comes in, it attaches there. We had a plumber come and install it the first time, and now we can just unscrew and screw it back, and it works really well. It was developed by the same company that makes Juice Plus back in the day, back in the probably 70s or 80s, and they sold it off to WM Filters about 5 or 6 years ago, and they distribute it there.
That is probably one of the most important things you could possibly do.
So I hear you say clean air by keeping your shoes clean and keeping that out of the house. I hear you saying clean water.
And then there's plastics, right? I mean, I was thinking a few months ago, we now all have microplastics in the sperm, in the egg. We now have identified they cross the precious border, your blood-brain border into your brain. We have microplastics in our brain. We each eat now about a credit card size of plastic a month. And it's traveling into our organs, into the placenta, into everything. So how can you minimize plastic, without going crazy because we live in such a plastic society? But brushing your teeth, you brush your teeth with these little teeny pieces of plastic. So I now use boar bristle toothbrushes that I get on Amazon, and not microwaving food in plastic, and trying to purchase as much as you can, like ketchup and mayonnaise, in glass. And if the stores don't have it, bug them. The squeaky wheel makes a big difference. I'm in Austin, which is the epicenter of Whole Foods. This is where Whole Foods started. The second city was in New Orleans, right where I went to Tulane. It's funny how I've been in both cities, but all of a sudden, after the pandemic, our organic and grass-fed chicken and beef was coming in shrunk-wrap plastic. And anything in shrunk-wrap plastic, the plastic's going into the first quarter of an inch. I write about this in Hormone Deception, into the food. So I started complaining to Whole Foods, and I went up the chain and up the chain and up the chain, and now they don't have any more shrunk-wrap plastic. They just cover the meat, but it's not in shrunk wrap. They heat like cheese that's slightly heated to have the plastic form around the shape of the food. But then the plastic with the endocrine disruptors goes into that food, and your children or you or your parents eat that food. So trying to avoid plastic, which is not easy to do. And of course, fish flesh is filled with plastic. Most sea salt has plastic in it, unless you get Celtic salt or real salt. So you have to kind of know, otherwise it'll drive you a little bit crazy. But once you know which salt is a healthy salt that doesn't contain it, you can say to yourself, I'll make 2 changes this month. I'll just do 2 changes that reduce my family's exposure to endocrine disruptors, and make yourself less stressed, and go about it just in a manageable unit so that you can start having a cleaner life. And then having, like you said before, throughout the year, ways in which you detox to get this stuff out of you, because it stores in fat cells, it stores in your bones, it sequesters in bone. And you've got to have a way to bump it, to break open the cells where it's stored, and then flush it out of the body. You can, and there's all kinds of steps to do that. I don't know if you might want to chat about that, but reducing exposure is important. And what you just said about that water filter, I didn't know about that. That sounds fabulous.
So exchange like this is so important too, is we are stronger together. And Kelly and I have been committed to that for a long time, is having conversations with this and getting it out to the masses. They've got to hear this, they do. And it doesn't take, I love what you said, Kelly and I talk often with our clients. It doesn't have to be 5 things right now. It can be 1 thing this month. If right now that's all your bandwidth can, maybe it's only one thing every 3 months, but do something, because cumulatively you'll look in the rearview mirror and go, look how far I've come.
That's so well said. So well said. And people are in information fatigue and kind of fear fatigue, I think, from COVID and the last few years and who do you believe who you're listening to. But I don't think anybody would argue with the fact that the more you can limit your exposure to nasty stuff, the better off you and your family and your unborn grandchildren will be. So taking one step or two steps a month is really like having a financial planner. It's having a genetic planner where you want to try and keep your genes healthier and your cells healthier. And you have to have people are funny. They're really into strategies for money.
Financial plans, right? They have financial plans. They have retirement plans. And then you ask them, do you have a wellness plan? And it's like a deer in the headlights look. And they're like, what do you mean? Well, if you don't have a wellness plan, it doesn't matter how much money you have. It just doesn't matter. Quality of life speaks volumes,
and it's not safe to get sick in our society anymore. The ERs don't work like they used to. The doctors aren't trained like they used to unless they've gone to A4M and some of the other, board certified in those programs. It does cost money, but it costs less money up front than it does on the other end if you get sick. And to get really sick in today's society is a very, very scary thing with an unknown outcome. Mm-hmm. So my girlfriend, who's a nurse practitioner, Jen, she said to me the other day, it is not safe to get sick in our society today. So I try and really inspire people to embrace this, to not look at it as one more thing to do, one more thing to educate yourself. Think of it as one more way to have an incredible future. Because I was ill all the time when I was young, and now in my mid-70s, I have the youth I was never able to really enjoy when I really was young. And most of my friends are living in a very different universe than I'm living right now. And I formed a women's kayaking team. I work out at the gym every day. I fly all over the world. I have 2-3 other. I just finished my next book. And to do all these things, you have to be well and have energy. So we're talking about the real money in the bank. The real financial planning is maintaining your energy and your health. It's not just words.
Right. Dr. Berkson, tell us about your new book.
So it's called Oxytocin Medicine, How to Use the Love Hormone to Heal Many Issues and Many Tissues.
I love that. So we focus a lot on oxytocin in February. Do you have resources? I haven't seen anything come out in that regard yet. I'm sure you will.
I will, but I just handed it in to my editor last Saturday morning. But, I was thinking a lot about it. I use oxytocin a lot for a variety of things in practice.
Sure.
Between nasal sprays or mixing it with a mucoadherent substance for esophageal disorders. I mean, even epidurals for end stage bone pain. It's very versatile. But what got me really thinking of a need for the book is that we have so much violence with our children today. Never before has it been like this with children, that they go into schools and shoot up other children and elders. And so I started thinking, oxytocin is the hormone of community, of empathy, of calm. So what's going on with our oxytocin receptor? And it turns out that oxytocin, which is the hormone of humanity from birth to brain health, it is one of the most vulnerable hormones to endocrine disruptors.
Wow. Bisphenol
A tramps it into little itty bitty pieces. All these chemicals that we've been talking about, they damage oxytocin. It's tremendously under attack, even starting with some of the theories are with the way Pitocin is delivered with a third to a half of our birth. So I thought it would be great to put all that together philosophically and then pragmatically into a book.
So that gives us something, it gives our listeners something to really be looking forward to and excited about when that book comes out. And we would definitely love to have you back because there's so much more that we want to dig into.
I apologize for being late today. I felt badly about that.
That just means we have to have a rain check for another.
Okay.
Yeah, we would love to have you back. Thank you so much. Like I said, you have been such a Your books have spoken to me for quite some time. Your story has spoken to me. Your story's given me hope in my own breast cancer journey. And so thank you so much for the time that you've even instilled in me at conferences when the booths were super busy. You took time to talk to me. And so I just want to thank you for that. And thank you for being here today to just kind of be the voice for those that are listening. We have so many people hungry for knowledge, and we really appreciate what you shared with us today.
That means a lot to me, and I look forward to chatting with you more. And I would really love to talk to you about that.
Preconception. Absolutely.
Yes.
100%.
Well, thank you so much once again. I hope you have a fantastic weekend, and good luck with this launch of this new book.
Thank you. And then I have several more that are coming down the pike, but you got to have oomph. You got to have energy. Energy is the body's money.
That's
Energy
right.
is the body's money. And the way to have that is just like you would have a financial planner, just like you just said, you have to have wellness strategies like water filters or taking your shoes off. And the far-reaching benefits are quite extraordinary. I'm here as living proof of that, really, truly.
The Synergee Podcast is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice, and no doctor-patient relationship is formed. The content of this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice for any medical condition they may have and should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions.